Okay, hi everyone. Hope you're doing well. If we have any new people, to introduce myself again, my name is Jay Rosen. I made Aliyah with Nefesh B'Nefesh almost 14 and a half years ago. And I volunteer to lead Cafe Oleh, which we really, hopefully, very, very soon will start meeting again in person. But the idea is to supplement the Hebrew that you are or not learning, but really focus on everyday Hebrew that you need in Israel to survive, much less live, a regular life, and certainly the life that you live in your respective countries of origin, and really focus on practical Hebrew. So not necessarily the Hebrew you're being taught in Ulpan, if you are at all, and really, because we have a lot of different levels here, we really focus on more beginners. We're soon starting a conversational class that Ali can give you more information about, and you'll certainly get by email. But in the meantime, this is a little bit more frontal lecture, but at the same time, we also invite you to be in touch with us. Any specific topics you want us to go over that can be as universal as possible. So not how do you specifically make an appointment with Maccabi, how does one go about doing that, which actually we're going to do in that conversation class. So today I thought we would do some review because as much as there's always something to talk about, it's also good to do review. And especially with all the new changes and things, both thank God with the arrival of one of the vaccines, but also with the new directives as we're making our way to a third lockdown or something akin to that. There's a lot of new directives out there, and there's a lot of new things that we need to follow and do and don't do. So I thought what we would do is go over again the imperative tense. Imperative, as we've talked about before, is just the fancy grammatical term for a command. It's a verb followed by an exclamation point, right? In English, we don't usually use grammatical terms like imperative and jussive and conditional, but the imperative is a separate tense still in English, even though, when I say speak exclamation point, I conjugate that the same way for one person as I do for multiple people. In other languages, Hebrew included, it's its own tense and it's conjugated based on who's speaking. We're going to go through that today. I'm actually going to show you, we have 4 different ways to show a command in Hebrew, how to say do or don't do something exclamation point. Some of these you've probably heard before, some of them you don't. This is more about recognizing the difference between them rather than conjugating for every single one. I'm just going to show you 4 different examples. If you have any questions while I'm talking, the chat window is there. Please write them in. When we have time at the end, I'll both address those and any other ones that you have along the way. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Just 1 second. There we go. Hopefully I can get to it. There it is. Okay. So with that, let me open this up. Full screen. Imperative. So as always, you are welcome to follow along. You are welcome to screenshot this. You are welcome to do old school pen and paper or pencil and paper, whatever you prefer. And also you will get a recording of this video. So if you want to go over what we go over today, if it's too fast for you to write things down, by all means, you'll be able to do so again. If the screen is too small for you, again, you'll be able to screenshot it, blow it up on your own, review it again, blow it up as well. Okay, so as I said, there's essentially 4 different ways that we do the command. But first, a very important part of any verb, just as you're going to do, and we've gone over this before about conjugation, we start with what we call the infinitive. The infinitive is nothing more than to do something, right? To speak, to go out, to get moving, to move, to anything. The infinitive is, it doesn't have any time or tense to it or gender. It's literally infinitive, right? It goes on for infinity. It's not confined by anything. That's where we start with everything. So let's take this first verb. This first verb is great because it is a completely regular verb. It doesn't have any weird conjugations, and it's used in all 4 cases of what I'm talking about in the command tense, right? So the first verb we're going to use here in row 2 here is ledaber, or ledaber if you can't say resh, right? Ledaber, over here, the infinitive, it means to speak. Okay, it's not to say, it's not to anything else, it's to speak, sometimes to talk. Okay, but ledaber is to speak or to talk, sometimes to talk. The one way that we know how to conjugate this is something you hear a lot, is simply taking the future tense of a verb and using that in the second person. Second person simply means you, whether it's you singular or you plural. So future second person of a verb can oftentimes mean a command. So in this case, we conjugate the verb ledaber in the future second person, and we get tidaber, which is to a single male, tidabri, to a single female, and tidabru, to a group irrespective of gender. Okay, so if you were to say to someone, tidaber, that could be said as you will speak, but also speak exclamation point. Okay, so either one is understood when you say tidaber. It's a lot in context, it's a lot in how you pronounce it, whether you're saying tidaber, and then there's more of a sentence, right? Tidaber k'shata yachol. Speak when you can. That could be a command actually, it may not be. Or you will speak when you can. I can translate that in either way. So it's a lot about context, but just know that in the future second person, all we mean by that is future tense, second person means you, Y-O-U. So you masculine singular, you feminine singular, you plural. Okay? Tidaber, tidabri, tidabru. That's one way that we can do a command, right? Speak, exclamation point. As you see, the X here underneath each of these tenses, the X is a variable, like in algebra, right? So whatever the variable is, in this case it's speak, I put that in there and I get speak, exclamation point, tidaber, tidabri, tidabru. The next form. The next form is actually the imperative tense. This is opposed to atid, future, which we just did. This is called sivui. Sivui comes from the word mitzvah, litzavot, but it's more specifically and more familiar to people, mitzvah. Mitzvah, as we all know, / should know, does not translate to a good deed. Mitzvah means a commandment, right? So just as the word command is in the word commandment, sivui is the command form or the fancy word imperative, right? This is, as it also says here, and it's important to know the distinction when there is one. The imperative is much less polite, right? When we use the future tense to command someone to do something, it's almost like you will speak, but it's also you shall speak. The imperative is not that. The imperative is very direct. It's very to the point. So you also need to keep in mind the context in which you would be using it or being told a command or a directive. The imperative clause, the imperative tense rather, is a very brusque, very gruff, very direct way of doing things, and thus it's not as polite, right? So if you say to someone or someone says to you, daber, dabri, dabru, they're not mincing words. They're telling you to get to the point. Do it immediately. Do it right now. Okay, this is a much less polite tense. And as you'll see, as we go farther down, some of these are conjugated in both the future and imperative as a command, and some of them are just in one or the other. In our case, tidaber can be said as a command as both future second person and also imperative. So you can say tidaber to someone, and you can also say daber to someone. You can say tidabri to a woman, you can also say dabri. You can say tidabru, and you can say dabru. It's not that you, in that the conjugation in both of these tenses is acceptable in modern Hebrew, but again, context is everything. There are going to be contexts where it's going to be appropriate to say tidaber to a man, and contexts where it can be acceptable to say daber, and vice versa where it's not going to be. That's on you, but again, understanding tidaber is more polite than daber. Okay? Those are two forms. Those are the most those are what I would going to call the most conjugated forms, in that the verb itself has to be conjugated. Now I'm going to show you an easy way out where you don't have to think about conjugation at all. I know for a lot of beginners, conjugation of verbs is really difficult. You don't always remember what tense you are and what is it, future, past, or present, and with the gender. It's a lot to take into, right? I'm going to show you the workaround, which is not only polite, it's very polite actually. The verb never gets conjugated. We're only going to do that infinitive. And that's these other two columns to the left. The first one is the preposition al plus the infinitive. So in this case, we're speaking to someone specifically or to a group of people, or we're mentioning a group of a specific person or persons, and we're telling them they must do something, right? And this form is different than using a verb like, in the case of ledaber, right? Some of you may know rotze or rotza. So ani rotze ledaber means I want to speak. Or let's say we're talking to someone because this is command, right? So you want to speak is ata rotze ledaber. You want to speak. You need to speak, ata tzarich ledaber. Again, some of you may know that verb tzarich. Ata tzarich ledaber. Neither of those are commands. You want to speak, you need to speak. They may have a connotation of a command, but that's not a command. You're not telling someone you must speak. Al plus the infinitive, in this case, ledaber, does that. In this case, alecha ledaber, or alech ledaber, depending on the gender. You must speak. Alecha ledaber. This is very formal Hebrew. This is very polite Hebrew. You do have to conjugate the preposition al by adding a suffix to it. So alai, alecha, alech, alav, aleha, and so forth. You can find a table of these in the back of any dictionary that you have, regardless of which one you have. You can also find them online. But al plus the infinitive means that the person to whom you're referring must do something, right? So alecha ledaber, you must speak. It's very polite. It's a little formal, in fact, but it's saving you from conjugating the verb. You do have to think about conjugating the preposition al, but that's a bit easier for some people than ledaber. Okay, so this is one other way of commanding someone to do something. And then the last one is actually the easiest one of all, because you don't have to conjugate a single part of this whatsoever. It's the easiest one, and that is yesh ledaber. You're going to hear this form all the time. I just got back from a run, which is why I'm wearing a t-shirt as opposed to a normal button-down shirt when I'm here on the call. And I walked by Carmelit, the bus depot in the center of Tel Aviv, and I could hear the announcements from the buses as they were lining up ready to go. And all of you who've been on a bus before, you know all of those different those announcements. Even if you don't know anything that what they're saying, almost all of them begin with yesh plus the infinitive. So in this case, it was yesh lakpid levatzer tikuf bechol nesia. It's important. You must perform the act. You must ensure that you validate your ticket upon entry into the bus. One of the other ones used a brand new word, lekaltis, which is just taking the word for kaltis, a ticket. One must validate one's ticket upon entry of the bus. But they all begin with the same exact command form of yesh plus the infinitive. Yesh, we're taught, right, means there is. And we use this to do possessions. It's a very common word, yesh, there is. But yesh in front of a infinitive verb means one must do something. So if you hear yesh ledaber, that means one must speak. It's referring in general to people. It's not specific. It's not specific to you or the person next to you. It's literally one. One must speak with so forth, or one must speak about. but it still has the air of a command, right? And that's why the announcements on the bus, public transportation, in the news with regards to directives with regards to the pandemic, vaccine, anything, both to be gender inclusive and also to be polite, but also, because we're talking about commands, to be a commanding command is yesh plus the infinitive, right? And you're going to see this again and again. The opposite of yesh ledaber is ein ledaber, and we're going to get to how do you negate a command right now. So in two of our forms, we can negate. We can say don't do something, right? In this case, the opposite of yesh, just like we know from possession and everything else, the opposite of yesh is the word ein. Okay, so if you're told yesh ledaber, one must speak. Ein ledaber is one must not speak. Okay, so just as yesh is positive when we use it in general, and ein is not. Ein means there is not. Yesh ledaber means one must speak. Ein ledaber, one must not speak, right? So if you're in some waiting area and you're told ein ledaber, one must not speak, that's what it means, right? If you see ein plus an infinitive, you know it's telling you not to do something. Whatever that infinitive is, it's telling you not to do that, okay? Yesh ledaber, one must. Ein ledaber, one must not, okay? One other form before we go through some of these different verbs that gets the negation is this one here, this future second tense, right? And the way we negate, instead of saying speak or you will speak, if we want to say to someone, don't speak, right? We can only do that in this future second person tense. And all we do is add the preposition al. Now, very important, it's al with an aleph, right? We've talked about before, spelling is incredibly important in Hebrew. You cannot jumble up letters in Hebrew. This is a great example. Al with an aleph plus future second person means don't do something. In this case, al tidaber, al tidabri, al tidabru. Okay, all of three of those are conjugated to mean don't speak, right? Al with an aleph before second person future tense, regardless of gender, means don't do something. Okay, so again, the only two forms of these four different ways of showing the command that have a negation is this one, future second person, and yesh or ein plus infinitive. Okay, so I want to show you why part of learning the language is also learning some things you're just not going to learn from a textbook is some of the most common commands that you'll hear on a regular basis and when they take which form. And we're primarily talking, when I say this, meaning which conjugation will be understood by someone. So if you need to command someone to do something or not do something, which one do I do? Now, a couple that make always the case. You can always use al plus the infinitive. You can always use yesh plus the infinitive. Always, always. You can almost always use the imperative. And you can always use the future second person if you're negating. Only if you're negating. There are cases, and I'm going to show you a few now, where using the future tense won't make any sense. It's just not used in modern Hebrew, and the imperative tense won't be understood. So let's go down. First one we're going to do is the infinitive verb lalechet. Lalechet means to go. When we use it in the imperative, it's go exclamation point, like get out, right? Lech. So lech is the singular masculine in the imperative. If I'm telling to a single male to go or to get out, I would say lech. I would not, as the black box indicates, I would not say telech. If I say telech to someone and I'm trying to impart go exclamation point, it will not be understood if I say telech. Okay? Common mistake among Hebrew learners It's totally understood why you would think that, but no, when it comes to the specific case of the verb to go, lalechet, it's lech, right? And also because when you're think of it this way, when you're telling someone to go or to get out, there's no nice way to say that, right? And like I told you, the imperative tense is the less polite version. So if you're telling someone to get out of here, that's not necessarily a polite thing. Even if it's protecting you, protecting someone else, it's not a polite thing to tell someone to move physically, right? So just to remember, imperative tense means less polite. Lalechet only gets conjugated for imperative. So lech, single masculine, lechi, single feminine, lechu for a group, okay? If I want to say, don't go, al telech, al telchi, al telchu, right? Like I said before, negation you can use any verb for negation in the future second person version, not in the imperative. Also because imperative doesn't have negation. Okay, so it's lech, lechi, lechu, go or get out, but don't go is al telech, al telchi, al telchu. Another verb that also people often get confused with, Hebrew learners get confused with, because it can also mean go or get out or get moving, is the infinitive linsoa. Linsoa, we typically mean we conjugate, or we translate as to travel. Linsoa versus lalechet. So as an aside, and a very important reason, if you are traveling a long distance, typically by some vehicle, a car, a train, a plane, you're going to use the verb linsoa. If you're going a short distance or you're traveling by foot, you're going to use lalechet. So if I say, ani nosea la mishpacha sheli, I'm traveling, I'm going to my family. When I use the verb nosea, it's understood by the person listening to me that I'm traveling a far distance and or using a car, a bus, a taxi, a train or plane or a ship or whatever, right? So linsoa versus lalechet. Lalechet, both of these can be just simply to go out, to go, to move. But the difference, there is a subtle difference between the two, and it's important to know. As for the conjugation here, to go or get moving or start traveling. So again, same thing as lalechet, it's only used in the imperative. Sa, se'i, se'u, right? So sa. Sa is masculine singular, se'i masculine feminine, se'u group regardless of gender. Sa, you will hear this, it's the part of the name of a famous song by Alec Einstein, Sa le'at, which means travel slowly or go slowly. Le'at means slowly. So sa le'at is a command, go slowly. If I wanted to negate this verb, it would be al tisa, al tis'i, al tis'u. Okay, right? Negation would be second future person tense that I didn't put here, but sa, se'i, se'u. Okay? I want to go through one more just because it has a very similar sound and has a very similar meaning, and then a few more, and then take your questions. Okay, another one that means to go or to move. In this case, lazuz. Lazuz means to move. And this one, again, you're going to hear in the imperative. Zuz, zuzi, zuzu. Right? 3 different conjugations. They all sound exactly alike, right? Lech, sa, zuz. Lechi, se'i, zuzi. Lechu, se'u, zuzu. Okay? Zuz means move. It can also mean get out in the same way. Lechanin. So zuz, when we use it as a command in modern Hebrew, typically means like get out of the way. Like move, right? Move or get out the way. It can mean both. Okay, if I wanted to negate this, I could say the same thing. Al tazuz, al tazuzi, al tazuzu. Simple as that, okay? Negation will always be future second person, but sometimes we have the imperative. And again, because we're telling someone to do something very quickly and very brusquely, it doesn't have a positive, it doesn't have the command tazuz. Tazuz will not be understood as a command. Here's one that will be understood as a command. Is the verb la'atzol. La'atzol means to stop in place, right? To stop movement, to stop. If you've been lalechet or lintzor lazuz, la'atzol is the opposite, to stop in place, right? So la'atzol means to stop. And here you will actually hear both forms to show command. So you're going to hear ta'atzol or ta'atzor, as well as you will see and hear atzol. You're going to hear ta'atzri and itzri, ta'atzru and itzru. In fact, ta'atzol is probably, the future tense is probably more commonly heard. You're going to hear this more from a police person, from a municipal worker, someone who's telling you to stop moving, versus atzol, itzri, and itzru will usually be written out, right? So a stop sign in Hebrew will either say ha'et, which means slow down, or it will say atzol, stop, okay? But ta'atzol, ta'atzri, ta'atzru is what you're going to mostly hear from people speaking. So both of these are going to be understood, but again, most people will say ta'atzol, ta'atzri, ta'atzru, and they'll write atzol, itzri, itzru. And again, to negate, you just take the future tense again. So al ta'atzol, al ta'atzri, al ta'atzru. So if you're at a protest, for example, and you are being arrested, because the verb la'atzol can also mean to arrest someone. So if you want to say to a policeman, whether you're at a rally or whatever else, don't arrest me, right? We're just going to do like we've done with all the other verbs. Al plus the future tense second person. So al ta'atzor oti, al ta'atzor oti, don't arrest or don't stop me. Okay? So al ta'atzor, don't stop, ta'atzor, stop, exclamation point. And then just like we had several different verbs for to go and to move, we have two different verbs for to stop. We've talked about this before, and this is, again, very important lesson in Hebrew because you're going to hear both of these verbs all the time. La'atzor is to stop in place. Lahafsik is to stop doing a specific action, right? Lahafsik is what we use before we, for example, if you're telling someone to stop smoking, stop talking, stop doing something very specific, not stopping in place. It may be part of what you're telling them to do. So I'm just putting on my headphones here. It is not. It is not the same as la'atzor. La'atzor is stop in place, stop exactly where you are right now. Lafsik is to stop doing something. So again, in this case, actually in this case it's different. In this case, you're only going to hear it normally in the future second person. Tafsik, tafsiki, tafsiku. Right? You've probably heard this before. Tafsiku ledaber. Stop talking to a group of people. Tafsiku ledaber. Stop talking. Tafsik, single masculine. Tafsiki, single feminine. Tafsiku, group irrespective of gender. And if I want to negate this, al tafsik, al tafsiki, al tafsiku. Okay? So very important, la'atzor, to stop in place, lahafsik, to stop doing something. Okay? And then one last, we actually have two more verbs here with a little bit more time, so I'll go through these very quickly. Lahatzil and lehitnaheg. Lahatzil means to save. Not to save money, not to save product. Usually it's used, to save a person, right? A lifeguard is called a matzil, is the person who saves. And if you hear someone screaming, hatzilu, right? The command, the imperative plural form, hatzilu. Hatzilu means like, come for help, please help. It's the equivalent of help, help. If you want to scream for help in Hebrew, for example, you want to scream hatzilu. And that means someone please come and save me. So, and you will hear actually this in both forms, tatzil, tatzili, tatzilu, hatzel, hatzili, hatzilu. Of all of these, the most commonly heard and commonly used is hatzilu. Whether it's serious, whether it's in jest, like, oh my God, save me from this. Like I'm scared from, I don't know, a movie, or I'm scared on a roller coaster ride, or legitimately I need help. Someone come fetch me help, hatzilu. Okay, but lahatzil is to save a life, to save a person, not anything else. Sometimes it's used nowadays when in a protest of saving an abstract concept, saving democracy, saving the economy, saving something that's abstract, but typically we use the verb lahatzil when we're talking about a person. Okay, so tatzil, tatzili, tatzilu, hatzel, hatzili, hatzilu. Hatzilu, again, is the most common. The other ones, the future second person I add here because you'll hear it often in songs. There was a Mizrahi song that was rather popular about 10 years ago, and the first line was Dr. Tatziloti. And he was talking, the singer was talking about, doctor, please save me. My heart is sick with love for this woman. Right? So tatzil is to save a person. Okay, and then the last one. Lihit naheg. Lihit naheg means to behave. So if you want to tell someone behave nicely, behave well, or you behave, is lihit naheg. Lihit naheg, titnaheg, titnagi, titnagu as the command. Right? So I want to say to an individual man, behave nicely, behave well, exclamation point, I would say titnaheg yafeh. Okay, titnaheg yafeh, titnagi yafeh, titnagu yafeh. All three of those mean behave nicely, behave well. Okay? That is the command. As I said, we have 4 different ways, 4 different options for you to give a command to someone. Some of them are more polite, some of them are less polite. Some of them are more common, some of them are less common. But you're going to hear a lot of these on a regular basis. It's the way a lot of us talk, right? It's one of the forms of subjunctive, which is a more emotional tense. So you're going to hear people using these command forms to articulate an idea or a wish or anything like that. It's important to know what they're saying and in what context. Are they saying it to you or someone else? Is it more polite? Is it less polite? Is it something that's pressing? Is it something that can wait a little bit? All of this will be understood by which of these 4 forms you use in a command. Okay, I see we have a bunch of questions, so I want to get to those before we move on. Okay. Okay, so when we're talking about, this is a great question that Richard asks about, please go. When we're using the imperative form, it's not a polite form, right? You're typically not going to say something like Yechezkel wrote, which is typically, you can hear lech bevakasha. But lech bevakasha is not being said in a polite way. Just like you would say that in English, right? Please go. Look at how I say it, right? Please go. That is not polite. Same thing here. Lech bevakasha is not polite, even though we use the word bevakasha, which means please. So when we're using the command form, all of our niceties, all of our politeness should be put to the side. We're not trying to address someone politely unless we're using this form al in the infinitive or yesh in the infinitive. If you say to someone lech bevakasha, you're giving them like basically a warning, right? You're saying go please, saying I would like you to go, but I'm being very forceful about it. before they simply say lechti. Okay, so lech bevakasha, let's say, is strike 2 out of 3. When you get to lech, it's over. Okay? Very important point. Sima says telech lamakolet. You will hear people use the future tense second person like that. You will hear telech lamakolet, but that's again meaning like you shall go to the store. It's a little bit more polite because you're using the future tense, like I said before. You are not, but you're not going to hear that very often. Telech lamakolet, you're speaking to someone that you're familiar with. If you were saying to someone to go somewhere, again, lech lamakolet. Telech lamakolet, it's not as common you're going to hear. If you're asking someone to do something, you have other words for that, right? Efshar lalech lamakolet, would you go to the store? It's as much asking as it is also like hinting you should do that. Is a more common way to do that. Okay? Richard's asking to see the lehit neheg. Let me just move things out of the way so you can see that here, Richard. Here's the neheg. Okay. Another question. The black boxes, by the way, if you didn't get that already, the black boxes are there because it's irrelevant. If you're thinking of it as a grid, it means that we don't conjugate for that. So in this case, lehit naheg, right? It conjugates in the future second person. It does not get conjugated in the imperative. That's why there's a black one there. Okay, simple as that. Sorry, just 1 second. I'm trying to get through some of these other. Scroll up. Okay, Rhonda asks about die. Great question. Die is not a directive. Die simply means enough. Okay, die is not a verb. We're talking about verbs here, solely about verbs. The word die in Hebrew means enough. So yes, you will hear and you can use die and say it with emphasis with an exclamation point on the end. You're simply saying enough. You're not telling someone specifically what you're doing enough of, right? It could be stop talking. It could be moving. It could be all sorts of things. But die simply means enough, exclamation point. We can use it in other contexts where there isn't an exclamation point. But in this case, die is not telling someone to do something. It's more like you're fed up and you're simply saying enough. It just happened, it helps for us English speakers that it's the word die, so it sounds even more like gruff and aggressive. But in Hebrew, it simply means enough. It does not necessarily mean stop, because we also don't know what action it's referring to. Miri asks about a phrase that she got, lo lehibahel, for don't panic. Lo lehibahel, you will hear that every once in a while, but lo lehibahel is only the negation, and you're not going to hear that as often as you're going to hear alecha or al or ein. Lo lehibahel, for don't panic. Yeah, you're going to hear that. Again, it's not as common because hopefully you're not being told don't panic too much, but lo plus an infinitive often can mean the same thing as don't do something. You just aren't going to find it as much, especially in everything I've seen with regards to, for example, government directives, use yesh and ein. So when it's saying yesh la tot masecha, you must put on a mask, or it's saying ein להתקרב לחולה corona. Do not approach someone who's sick with the plague. They're using yesh the ein in formal directives, both from the government and on news. So it's something you're going to see much more common. But yes, if you see lo plus an infinitive, it means don't do something. Okay. Any last questions about these? Okay. Katya Sen asked a great question privately to me about the difference between some other verbs, right? Like we went through lalechet, linso, and lazuz, and latzoan versus lafsik. We'll save that for the next lesson because it's actually a really good one. I'm making notes myself there. But yes, otherwise, these are important verbs because we use these all the time, but also they have slight differences in meaning. So let me just make a note to myself about that. Any last questions before I just want to review something really quick, actually, if we still have time. Sorry, just want a few more questions here. Nechama asks, sa generally means to go in the sense of to travel. To go to the grocery store would be in the next town, you would still say lech. Again, if you're traveling a long distance, you're going to use the word sa. And in most cases, most people in Israel, again, most people in Israel live in the center of the country where there's a grocery store nearby. So there isn't the need to go to the next town over for a specific grocery. So you would simply just say, lech lemakolet, right? Makolet is the word for grocery store. Lech lemakolet, go to the grocery store. It could be the grocery store that's literally around the block from me. It could be one that's 10 blocks away from me. But it's understood it's in a vicinity. If you need to say salamakolet, that's more a reflection on you and the person you're speaking to of where you are in the area. But the vast majority of Israelis, simply because there is a grocery and makolet nearby, the vast majority of Israelis, I didn't say all, vast majority, they're going to say lech, lechi, lechu lemakolet. Okay? A few more questions here, some really good questions I see here. Lorraine asks, how do you say don't write that? Okay, so how do we say we negate? We take the future second person and we add the word al before it. So if I was speaking to you, Lorraine, as a woman, I would say al tichtevi. I take the verb, the infinitive lichtov, I conjugate it for the future second person feminine. So I'm speaking to you. Al tichtevi ze, or etze, or etzot, depending on what we're referring to. But don't write that. Al plus future tense of lichtov. Okay? Great question. Robin asks a great question, which is partially the reason why I use the verb li'itnaheg. Can you say na li'itnaheg? Great question. Na is a fancy formal Hebrew for bevakasha. Na simply means please. So if you're saying to someone na li'itnaheg, you're saying please behave, but it's not quite a command because you're saying please. Think of when you say please to someone, you're not commanding them, you're requesting something. And request versus demand has a big enough difference between the two that it's not considered a command to say, na lehitnaheg. I'm not commanding someone to behave, I'm suggesting, I'm asking them to do so. I'm not telling them to do so. It's a great thing to say to someone to show respect, but also to get respect in return by saying na lehitnaheg. In fact, if any of you watch the Israeli version of Big Brother, Ha'ach Agadol, the Big Brother, the hosts, when they cut back to the house to show, what's going on in the house, they have this catchphrase where they say, na naheg behetem, and the whole audience screams it at the same time. Please behave accordingly, meaning please behave politely, right? Na naheg behetem. Behetem means accordingly or appropriately, but it's still not a command. It's please. It's asking someone to do something. Robin, great question. I don't have kids, so I can't answer that. What you say to kids, I would just follow what the parents around you are saying, but you will hear them use both future second person and imperative. It depends on the context. It depends what they're doing. For example, if I wanted to say to a child, be quiet, you will hear tishtok and you will hear shtok. Tishtok, because we said the future tense, and that is tishtok, is a little less gruff, is you're telling your child to be quiet, but not quite as rough. Whereas if you say shtok, you are being very stern, you're being very serious, you're telling the child to shut up. Okay? So there's a slight difference, but I would just follow what the parents that you like and trust around you are doing. Michelle asks about sheket bavakasha. Any of you who grew up in, I know this from my upbringing in America, we know this term. We've adopted it as if it's a command. It's not. Sheket simply means quiet, silence. It's not a verb, it's a noun. Sheket. Sheket is the quiet. Bavakasha is please. So quiet, please. We translate that in our English-speaking minds as a command, but in Hebrew it's not, because there's no verb there. It's sheket bavakasha, quiet please. We're not telling someone to be quiet, we're asking for quiet. So yes, normally when we say that, especially I know this growing up in summer camp, the madrichim, the counselors will scream sheket bavakasha, and then the reply is hey, right? And some of us know that. But sheket bavakasha in Hebrew is not a command. It's not a tzivui. It's just we've adopted it in the way we say it as if it is one, but it's a great question. Great. Any other questions about verbs and commands? I see we have a couple questions that are not related. I don't want to address those right now, just on this. Okay. All right, a few other questions that I see outliers here, and we're going to save the one from Katya for another day. Let me just quickly write down those verbs. That's a great one. Okay, so we have a couple other verbs, a couple other questions rather here. What is the root of ha'et? Gilshon, I don't know off the top of my head. I have to look at a verb group. Actually, we can look at it right now as we're on this. I've shared this before with all of you. There is a great website that conjugates all verbs in existence of Hebrew. It's called pe'alim.com. It also has a app, apparently. So all I'm going to do is type in the verb leha'et, which means slow down, right? It even has a virtual keyboard. If you can't type in Hebrew, you can just do click. And it shows me everything, all the conjugations, including the question here, the root. So the root in this case is aleph, tet, tet. Okay, and if I press view full conjugation, it's going to give me everything, right? How to conjugate in every single thing, including the imperative, like we talked about today, ha'et, ha'iti, ha'itu. Ha'et is the one I talked about before that we've talked about. Okay, great question, great resource, pe'alim.com. Bruce asked a question that we've talked about quite a lot, but happy to repeat it. To say you must wear a mask. First off, you are being told this. You are not telling someone to do this because unfortunately there have been cases of violence when people have been asked by someone else to put on a mask. In fact, it was just in the news today, someone who attacked two different store owners in Netanya was arrested because they physically attacked two different store owners, much older than them, after they were requested to put on a mask. But to say that in Hebrew, yesh la'atot masecha. You'll also see, and I'm not going to repeat this because we've actually covered this quite a few times and it's in some of the recordings that we've had. La'atot is the verb that is the most properly used for a mask. In Hebrew has a lot of interesting quirks. One of them is that we have lots of different verbs for the act of putting on specific clothes. So when I put on a shirt, ani lovesh chutza. I wear a shirt, or I put on a shirt. Putting on shoes has its own verb, lin'ol. Ani no'el na'alayim. I put on shoes, right? There are even more of these. Some of these we use in everyday Hebrew, most of these we don't. The only other ones that we use on a regular day basis are three other ones. Ani chovesh kova, or ani chovesh kippah. If you're putting on some sort of hat or a head covering, you use the verb lachavosh. If I wear glasses, sunglasses or eyeglasses, ani malkiv mishkafayim. I put on glasses, ani malkiv mishkafayim. And the last one is ani ote masecha. I put on a mask. Now you will see people will say, and you'll see signs that say lilbosh, that everyday verb for to wear. Technically incorrect, but it's still accepted. And you'll see them use the one I had for a head covering, right? Yesh lach rosh masecha. Because the thought is a chovesh kippah or chovesh kova, something that covers your hair is just like it's covering your face. So that's why you'll see that one used, but the correct verb is la'atot, an ayin and a tet. Okay, yesh la'atot masecha, one must wear a mask. Okay. Okay. Michael asks, please repeat when you use ein and al to negate. Great point. Let me do that before we get to a few other questions. So ein. Ein is the opposite of yesh, just like in everyday life, right? Yesh means there is, ein means there isn't. When we use it in front of an infinitive, yesh means one must do something. Ein plus an infinitive means one must not do something. Right? So yesh ledaber, one must speak or one must talk. Ein ledaber, one must not speak, one must not talk. Okay? Yesh, one must. Ein, one must not. Okay? And al is used with the future second person to negate any command. So whether it's used in, whether we're conjugating the future, whether we're using the imperative. So if I want to say to someone, because remember I told you, we don't use in modern Hebrew the future second person of limsoa to say go or get out or move. But if I want to say don't move, don't travel, don't go, al tisa, right? I simply take the word al with an aleph and then the appropriate conjugation in future tense, right? So al tidaber, don't speak. Tidaber, speak. Okay, so ein is used before a infinitive to mean one must not in a very general sense. It's not talking about a specific person, whereas al is used before the future second person and it's very specific to whom you're referring, to whom you're speaking. Okay. Any more questions? Mili, is there a reliable online source for how to pronounce all those Hebrew acronyms? No, you just learn them. You just learn acronyms. Acronyms, as we know in Hebrew, are usually recognized as two apostrophes between the second to last and last letters. You just learn them. There is no uniform anything for them. Sorry. The default vowel for most of Hebrew is ah. So when in doubt, try to pronounce everything with ah, but there are going to be lots of outliers for that. So that's just how it works. We did. Vivian, yes, for jewelry it's la'anod, but again, we don't use that very often. La'anod tachshitim, you're not going to hear people speak like that on a regular basis. And you just want to be careful. Anyone who wants to find these out, they're actually really good. All the different verbs you use for specific parts of your clothing. But if you use them, people are going to assume you're fluent in Hebrew. So if you're not fluent in Hebrew, it's great to show off, but just know people are going to expect a bit more from you. So maybe that's actually a good incentive for us all to learn all those, but we don't use those very often. So la'anod tachshit, la'anod sha'on, we don't normally say those, but they're good to know. They're actually really good to know for when we can have small talk in happy hour and have those conversations in person. Sima, I mean, I'm sorry, guys. We've talked about do not put on a mask a million times. It's everywhere. It's masecha with a samech. You can't avoid any sign, any store has it written out. It's mase. Let me just write it out just for everyone's sake. Please write this word down. Actually, I'm going to tichtavu et hamila hazo. Right? Write this word down. We're doing commands. Tichtavu et hamila hazo. Masecha. Masecha is a mask. Okay? Tichtavu et hamila hazo. Masecha. Please, not even please, write this word down. Masecha is a mask. So fair enough. But yes, now you know, you see this word every single place. Masecha. Okay. Any last questions?
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you, everyone. You will get the recording tomorrow, as well as the links to sign up for the Ulpama and Yan Hebrew class. So keep an eye out for that. No need to email me. Every single person will receive the recording. Thank you. Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Bye. Litrot.